A black honor student walks into a luxury car dealership, cash in hand, scholarship letter in pocket. Moments later, he's pinned to the floor, accused of stealing his own identity. The cameras were off. The cops were already called. And the dealership manager, smiling, like it was routine. But what they didn't know, he was live streaming the whole thing. What happened next would shatter the city's silence. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The clamor of Manhattan life beat heavy on Fifth Avenue. But that afternoon, one sound cracked the air louder than taxi horns or sidewalk chatter. Laughter. Not just any laughter. Sharp, smug, and deliberately loud. It came from a man draped in a $1,000 trench coat, his cufflinks catching the mid-afternoon sun like tiny spotlights. Thaddeus Wexler, CEO of one of Wall Street's most ruthless hedge funds, stood with his arms outstretched, Rolex glinting as he tilted his wrist dramatically toward the crowd. "You fix watches, huh?" He smirked, eyeing the modest sidewalk stand in front of him. The vendor behind the table didn't flinch. Marlon Gates, 29, straightened his shoulders and calmly replied, "That's what the sign says." He wore a faded hoodie, the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing calloused hands, tools of precision. His table was no more than 3 feet wide, littered with loupes, magnifiers, and half-dissected timepieces. Behind him stood a fold-out chair, a thermos of lukewarm coffee, and a cardboard sign that read, "Time mends all, except when you're late." Thaddeus took a step closer, his entourage lingering nearby, 2 assistants and a smirking VP named Carter. Their tailored suits and polished shoes contrasted violently with Marlon's scuffed boots and concrete-stained jeans. Then, without warning, Thaddeus unstrapped his Rolex and tossed it across the table. "Fix this and I'll give you the watch," he said, laughing. "Hell, fix it right and I'll throw in a job recommendation. Maybe get you out of this little lemonade stand." People nearby froze. A teenager recording with his phone caught the exact moment the Rolex landed, with a dull clink. The tension was sharp. This wasn't a bet. This was a performance. A corporate giant challenging a black man on the street, turning skill into a spectacle. Marlon didn't smile. He picked up the watch, cradling it with care, fingers moving like memory. "I'll take a look," he said evenly. His voice wasn't shaky. It wasn't angry. It was too calm, too deliberate, and that unsettled Thaddeus more than any protest would have. Thaddeus raised a brow. "You got tools for that, or just dreams?" Marlon didn't answer. He turned away, pulled his loupe to his eye, and examined the Rolex. The movement was off. It wasn't ticking right. Not dead, just staggered. He popped open the back casing, with a fine blade. Beneath the golden gears, something glinted unnaturally, an unusual circuit board, smaller than a postage stamp, soldered into the mechanism in a way Rolex never would. His brow furrowed. He reached for his pickup tweezers, gently lifting the edge of the chip. Thaddeus leaned in. "Well? Gonna give up already?" But Marlon wasn't listening. Something was wrong. Watches were his language, his escape. This wasn't a malfunction. This was tampering. He flipped the watch face over and examined the hands again. The second hand wasn't just staggered. It was programmed to stop every 22 seconds, then jump 3 ahead. A pattern. Marlon glanced up at Thaddeus. "Where'd you get this watch?" Thaddeus smirked. "Geneva. Custom made. Expensive. You wouldn't know the brand." Marlon didn't blink. "It's been modified." Thaddeus' grin thinned. "Modified?" Carter echoed, inching forward. "What are you implying?" Marlon set the Rolex down. "Whoever did this embedded a micro-signal chip. It's not just a watch. It's tracking something. Possibly someone." A hush spread among the gathering crowd. "You suggesting I'm wearing a bug?" Thaddeus chuckled awkwardly, but the edge in his voice was undeniable. "No," Marlon said, voice now lower, sharper. "I'm saying your watch is broadcasting data, and not to a time server." The crowd stirred. Someone muttered, "What kind of data?" Marlon kept his eyes locked on Thaddeus. "That depends on what you've got to hide." The atmosphere fractured. A harmless bet had just become something darker. Thaddeus stepped back. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know watches," Marlon replied, lifting the loupe from his eye. "And this ain't one." A brief silence followed before Carter reached forward, snatching the Rolex from the table. "We're done here," he hissed, shooting Thaddeus a wary glance. "Let's go." As the trio turned, Marlon called out, You said if I fixed it, the Rolex was mine. Thaddeus froze, back still turned. For a moment, he seemed to weigh his options, embarrassment or arrogance. He turned slowly, voice cold. You want that cursed thing? Be my guest. He tossed a mocking smile. Maybe you can pawn it for rent. Then he vanished into the crowd, his trench coat flaring behind him. Marlon stood still, the chill of Manhattan wind brushing against his neck. Around him, murmurs and phone cameras buzzed. But his focus was already on the Rolex in his palm. He pulled his magnifier one last time and tilted the circuit board under the light. Tiny letters became visible, etched in nearly invisible ink. VX003 client. He recognized the prefix VX, Vexler. But what was 003 client? And what did red mean? Marlon packed his tools slowly, thoughts racing. It wasn't about the Rolex anymore. It never was. He zipped his bag and turned toward the subway, unaware that two men in black coats had been watching from across the street, men who didn't move when the CEO left. They only moved when Marlon did. As Marlon descended the subway steps, the Rolex's face blinked red for the first time, its second hand freezing entirely. The subway hummed beneath Marlon's boots, echoing through the dim corridors like the pulse of a restless city. He held the Rolex tight in his jacket pocket, as if it were fragile or cursed, maybe both. He could still hear Thaddeus's laugh, echoing in his skull like an old wound being reopened. But it wasn't the humiliation that kept his chest tight. It was what he saw inside the Rolex. That circuit board wasn't just out of place. It was criminally precise, military grade. He hadn't seen tech like that since his freshman year at MIT, back before everything was taken from him. Back before the letter arrived. Back before Professor Killian Monroe. He could still remember the day. Rain hammering the campus like it knew what was coming. He sat in the engineering lab alone, surrounded by wires and processors, finishing the final prototype for a modular biometric signal interceptor, a device light enough to hide inside a timepiece. He was just 20, a black kid from Queens, with a brain wired like a motherboard, and dreams stacked higher than tuition bills. Then Monroe called him in. A smile like ice, the kind that cut before it melted. "You've violated academic conduct, Mr. Gates," the professor said without blinking. Marlon froze. "I built that design from scratch. You saw me work on it for 6 months. Monroe adjusted his tie. "The committee disagrees. There's concern your work is too sophisticated to have originated from a second-year undergrad without assistance." The word assistance was a lie wrapped in a compliment. Monroe was careful never to mention race, but it dripped from every syllable. The implication was clear. A kid from the hood wasn't capable of something so refined, especially not without stealing. By the time Marlon's appeal was heard, the patent had already been filed by a grad student. Monroe, mentored. His scholarship vanished. His dorm key was deactivated. MIT scrubbed his name like chalk from a blackboard. He left with nothing but notebooks, a borrowed duffel bag, and a deep, unshakable mistrust in anyone who called themselves professional. Now, nearly a decade later, that same design, or some dark cousin of it, sat hidden inside a Rolex that landed in his lap by racist arrogance. But it wasn't just the chip, it was what it connected to. Marlon had spent the night hunched at the back of his walk-up apartment, soldering lamplight flickering over his tools. He'd reverse-engineered the chip's frequency, found it broadcasting every 42 seconds to a protected server address, VXLink, Verdant Holdings. The same server Vexler's fund used to store private client data, and the signal wasn't tracking time. It was pinging names, addresses, transactions. He found lines of code, tied to encrypted files, labeled VX03, VX04, and down the list. Each matched to internal tags, labeled QCRM, TSK01, and the most damning, redacted, LT demo. This wasn't a watch. It was a vault key. Marlon sat back in his chair, sweat beading despite the cold. Vexler's Rolex had been configured as a clandestine access device, one that could unlock and potentially expose a list of ultra-private clients tied to Verdant Holdings. The kind of people who didn't like being seen. Political donors, defense contractors. Even one flagged name from the Department of Education. His hands shook slightly as he reached for his thermos. The cold coffee tasted like copper, but he swallowed it anyway. What was he supposed to do? He wasn't a whistleblower. He wasn't even a registered engineer anymore. All he had was a backpack of tools, a public bench, and the truth. And the truth had cost him everything before. He could return the Rolex. Forget what he saw. Pretend it was just a trick of the light and cash out. Maybe pawn it. Maybe shut up. Maybe survive. But then he remembered the smirk on Wexler's face. The theatrical way he tossed the Rolex like bait in front of a crowd. This was never about a broken watch. It was about belittling the man fixing it. Returning the Rolex wouldn't close the door. It would lock it permanently. He looked down at the screen again. The name flashing across it made his stomach lurch. Client tag VX003, Don Lathorne, Rural Georgia Voter Influence Test. He slammed the laptop shut, breath catching. This wasn't just about private clients. It was about influence, politics, voter suppression. That chip inside the Rolex wasn't just broadcasting names. It was evidence, and evidence got people killed. A knock sounded at his apartment door, 3 short raps. He froze. Nobody visited. Nobody knew this address except he opened the door slowly. She stood there in a dark green trench coat, curls tucked into a wool cap, light brown skin, eyes sharp and scanning the hallway behind her. "I know what that watch holds," she said before he could speak. Marlon's voice caught in his throat. "Excuse me." She stepped forward. "I don't have time to explain. But if you keep that thing, you're already in the crosshairs. If you use it," she paused. "Let's just say Wexler won't be your only problem." Marlon stepped back warily, but the sincerity in her eyes wasn't fake. She was scared, but practiced, trained. "Who are you?" he asked. She didn't answer. She pulled a small metallic card from her coat and slid it across his table. It bore no name, just a logo, a phoenix with circuitry in its wings. "Tomorrow, 7 p.m. Bryant Park, South Bench. Bring the watch." She turned, coat fluttering, and disappeared down the stairs before he could ask anything more. Marlon looked down at the card. Beneath the phoenix emblem, barely visible under the right light, were 3 letters etched in silver. FBI. Bryant Park at dusk, shimmered with golds and shadows. City lights flickered through the trees like nervous glances, and the scent of roasted nuts and car exhaust hung in the summer air. Marlon sat on the south bench, the Rolex secured in the inner pocket of his coat, its weight now psychological. He kept his head low, eyes flicking from stroller-pushing parents to jogging students. Any one of them could be watching. Any one of them could be them. At 7:06, she appeared, not walking, but sitting beside him without a sound, like a thought that had always been there. The woman from the stairwell. Her coat was the same dark green, but tonight, her hair was out, coiled with intent. "Relax," she said, eyes scanning the area. "I'm not here to arrest you." Marlon didn't relax. "You always late?" "Always careful," she replied, then turned to face him fully. "My name is Agent Celine Rourke. I'm with a division of the FBI that doesn't exist publicly. And no, don't bother looking it up. What I'm about to say, no one officially sent me to say." Marlon blinked, dryly. "That's comforting." She ignored the sarcasm. "I've been tracking Wexler's firm for almost 2 years. The Rolex you're holding is one of several tech devices used in a shell operation. We suspect involves data laundering, voter suppression modeling, and an unauthorized surveillance." Marlon stared. "So, you know what's inside?" "Not all of it," she admitted. "The chip's programming is highly compartmentalized. But the fact that you were able to get even a partial read on it means you're either a genius or you've seen this kind of tech before." Marlon didn't answer. His jaw flexed. She caught the tension immediately. "I know about Killian Monroe," she said, voice softer now. That cut deeper than expected. He turned to her, tone sharp. "He destroyed my scholarship, got me expelled. He said my work was too sophisticated to be credible. Then he patented it and sold it." She nodded. "And guess who funded that patent's acquisition?" He didn't need her to say it. The bile in his throat already answered. "Wexler. That man built a good part of his empire off stolen mines," Celine said. "But yours is the only one we can prove. That Rolex is the bridge. You can help bring him down." Marlon looked at her badge, hanging just slightly under her coat now. It gleamed faintly, but the weight of institutional power behind it did nothing to calm him. "I don't trust the system," he said flatly. "I don't trust the badge. I've watched cops slam my friends for sagging jeans. Watched professors erase my name from my own work. Watched bank managers call security when I asked about opening a line of credit for my business." His voice had risen slightly, but Celine didn't interrupt. She waited, listening fully. He exhaled. What makes you different? Celine hesitated. My mother was black, from Baltimore. She died during a routine traffic stop when I was 13. The cop said she reached for something. Turned out it was her inhaler. Marlon's eyes softened slightly, but wariness remained. I joined the bureau to change the system from inside. Celine continued. Turns out the system prefers not to be changed. So I've learned to work adjacent to it. They sat in silence for a moment, the thrum of the city around them like a muffled drum roll. So what now? Marlon finally asked. Celine pulled a flash drive from her coat. If you upload the decrypted data on this to our secure server, we'll have probable cause to subpoena Verdant Holdings. Vexler will panic. His people will scramble. But it will make your life complicated. Marlon didn't take the drive yet. And if I say no, she didn't blink. Then your name disappears. So does mine. He laughed bitterly. So it's help us or vanish. That's justice? It's the only option that ends with you still walking. Marlon stared at the trees, wind rustling their leaves like secrets. He thought of the kids who passed his stand every day, of his little cousin in East Flatbush, always talking about becoming an engineer, of how the world would tell that boy just like it told Marlon. You don't belong here. He reached for the flash drive but stopped. I need time. Celine stood. You've got 24 hours. That's how long until they realize the Rolex isn't where it should be. And then she was gone again. No parting words. No dramatic exit. Marlon sat with the drive in his hand, the weight of history pressing on him like gravity. The next morning, he returned to his vendor table on Fifth Avenue. As he unlocked the crate holding his tools, something felt off. His seat had been shifted slightly. His screwdriver wasn't where he left it. Then he saw them. Two men in navy suits, clean-shaven, with identical expressions, cold professionalism. Mr. Gates? One asked, pulling a folder from his coat. Who's asking? The man handed him a thick envelope. You are hereby served a cease and desist on behalf of Verdant Holdings and Mr. Thaddeus Vexler. You are to refrain from public commentary, analysis or possession of the proprietary item in question, namely, a Rolex Submariner, serial number 4. Marlon didn't even flinch, but his heart was thundering. How did you know I had it? The second man gave a slim smile. Let's just say Mr. Vexler has eyes on all his assets. They walked away as fast as they'd appeared, their warning echoing louder than any siren. Marlon opened the envelope and found a photo inside him, sitting with Celine at Bryant Park, timestamped to the exact minute. The morning after being served the cease and desist, Marlon slid into his vendor seat on Fifth Avenue with a hollow ache in his chest. He locked eyes with every passerby, half expecting them to smirk or cross the street. He pulled out his toolkit gingerly and arranged each screwdriver and loop with practiced precision. But his hands trembled not from fear, but from the cold realization that his world was crumbling under his fingertips. At 8:13 a.m., a news alert buzzed on his phone. Tech vendor accused of corporate data theft. The headline was accompanied by a blurred image that looked undeniably like his stand. The article claimed Marlon had reverse-engineered the Rolex chip, stolen proprietary corporate tech, and intended to sell it to foreign actors. Quotes from a source close to Verdant Holdings slammed him using racially coded language, words like ambitious, unpredictable, and a liability. He stared at it. His breath came shallow. His stall felt exposed. His identity redefined by rumor. Within minutes, someone asked if he had seen the viral post. Another whispered that Verdant had released drone footage showing a man matching Marlon's description trailing Vexler through the financial district, implying Marlon had been stalking the CEO for weeks. Video stills from the doctored clip spread around social media. He hadn't been near Wall Street in months. A mother with a stroller crossed the street with her child, whispering to her partner, "That guy looks dangerous." A man in a suit glanced at him and hurried on. The loyalty of regular customers evaporated against the tide of media lies. He closed the news window, heart pounding. He leaned back, head tilted toward the sky, as if searching for absolution in the pollution overhead. Silently, he asked, how did they get footage, and who gave them the narrative? His phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. They're coming for your license. You have till noon. No sender. No context. Just urgency. He stood abruptly, folding the news article to close. But the glare of phone camera light from across the street caught his eye from a drone above a black SUV, idling on the corner. It hovered, cameras swiveling. The black SUV pulled away, disappearing. The drone continued, filming closer. Then another alert. City of New York. Vendor licensee under review for breach of regulations. At 10:02 a.m., the Office of Vendor Enforcement pulled up in an unmarked van. Two officials approached. Badges rotated. One held a clipboard, the other filming with a steady camera. "Mr. Gates?" the clipboard holder asked, tone official and flat. "Yes. We have notification that your vendor license is under suspension pending investigation. You're required to cease operations immediately." They collected his permit and told him to pack his belongings. He retrieved his tools, heart pounding as they loaded the crate into the van. Marlon's neighbor vendors watched from across the street, some with sympathy, most with suspicion. He locked eyes with none of them. He hauled his empty table away, chest tight with betrayal. Later that afternoon, as he sat in his apartment, phone in hand, an email arrived. Subject line: urgent legal documents, Verdant Holdings. He opened it. His stomach churned. Attached, a formal revocation letter of his vendor license, a notice of civil trespass, a preliminary criminal warrant indexing, David Reagan as a suspect. Name, date of birth, photo, and the mugshot displayed was unmistakably Marlon's. He stared, paralyzed.
Who was David Reagan?
The alias was fake, but everything matched him. His looks, his accent, his birthday. They had created a legal identity entirely separate from his true self. Now authorities were being forced to arrest him for espionage, corporate theft, trespass, and worse. He swallowed hard, head spinning. This wasn't just defamation. This was disassociation, an attempt to legally replace him with a phantom. They were erasing Marlon Gates by filing charges on a fake identity with his face. He thought of his mother's voice calling him in for dinner, laughing at his jokes. He thought of the MIT letter he tore up. He thought of the first time he opened a watch without breaking it. He thought of Celine's badge, of the FBI that may or may not exist to protect him. None of it mattered now. The city he'd built his life in was now legally mandated to remove him. He felt detachment creeping in, like a glitch himself. His phone pinged again. A video clip titled "Confirmed Market Surveillance, Asset Misappropriation." He played it. The clip began with drone footage of him picking up the Rolex in Bryant Park the night before. It cut to the handshake image of Wexler walking away, then the same footage from the square showing him behind the bench. The timestamps were matched to the photo Servin popped in the envelope. Someone had converted a polite transaction into evidence of conspiracy. He turned his head toward the darkened street outside, rain beginning to dot the glass. The city continued moving, indifferent to his unraveling. An unexpected ping. Another message, this time from another unknown number. "Come to the location on the back of your license." You know what that means. He flipped open the revoked license in question. On the back, barely visible, was an address. It was his own. Address he'd never given anyone outside immediate paperwork. Someone inside the city government, or Verdant's network, routed that info. He closed the door to his apartment and leaned hard against it, eyes shut. He could almost hear Wexler's laugh again, that arrogant whisper of power. How far had it gone? Just then, his front door buzzed with a notification from the intercom downstairs. "David Reagan, you have 3 minutes to respond." It was a security protocol for his own building. But David Reagan wasn't on the tenant list. The intercom system had already been rewritten. He broke contact with the door's screen and backed away, heart now hollow with dread and resolve. Because they weren't just after a watch. They were after his identity. Minutes later, his phone lit up again. This time with a deepfake video message, a distorted version of himself calling him David Reagan, saying "Stand down, or I become you." It began with a routine walk, or what Marlon had desperately hoped would feel routine. He kept his hood low, his pace slow, avoiding cameras and eyes alike, as he made his way through Washington Heights toward a community tech workshop that had once hosted him as a guest mentor. It was supposed to be a quiet visit. He needed a space with stronger firewalls to decrypt the flash drive Celine had handed him. And he trusted the neighborhood. He didn't see the two plainclothes officers until they were already beside him. "Hey you," the taller one barked, grabbing Marlon's wrist.
"What's this about?" Marlon tried to step back, but the shorter officer had already twisted his other arm behind him. Before Marlon could protest, his knees hit the pavement. Across the street, a group of elementary school kids from PS 73 were walking with their teacher. They froze. Phones came out. One little boy dropped his juice box.
The officer's radio crackled. "Suspect in custody. ID matches David Reagan. No resistance." "No resistance?" Marlon spat. You slammed me before I could speak. But the cuffs clicked shut. He wasn't a man anymore. He was a subject. The taller officer leaned down with a smirk. Nice Rolex, David. Guess the street vendor hustle wasn't paying enough, huh? Marlon's mouth tightened. He didn't say a word. If he opened his mouth, his grief might come out with it. The kids across the street watched silently as he was pushed into the back of the squad car. Within minutes, the footage went viral. The angle from the drone gave it an overhead cinematic view. Suspect in high-tech espionage caught in broad daylight. News banners looped endlessly on social platforms. Voiceovers called him a former engineering student turned radicalized tech thief, using words like unauthorized surveillance, cyber weaponry, and internal threat. Not once did they use the name Marlon Gates. Not once did they question how a man with no weapons, no record, and no warrant could be arrested so publicly with such force. The NYPD refused to comment on charges, which officially still didn't exist. But that didn't stop the narrative. Channel 5's news anchor called him a reminder that even geniuses can go rogue when ambition outweighs ethics. The New York Herald headline blared, MIT whiz turned watch repairman turns criminal. A city betrayal. Only one article, buried in an independent tech blog, questioned the legality of the arrest. The post was up for 3 hours before it was deleted. In the holding cell, Marlon sat on the cold bench, fingers still smelling faintly of rust and regret. His thoughts spiraled. Was this what it came to? No trial, no charges, just an image? A black man on a sidewalk in cuffs, edited into someone else's life? The officer guarding the door scrolled on his phone, chuckling to himself. Man, they got your face everywhere. You're trending harder than the mayor's DUI. Marlon didn't respond. He stared at the ceiling, breathing shallowly. The Rolex wasn't on him. It had been tucked in his sock before he left home. A gamble. If they'd found it, this wouldn't be detainment. It would be rendition. Suddenly, the hallway lights flickered. A low alarm beeped twice. Then silence. The officer checked his radio. Static. That's when he appeared. Agent Celine Rourke. Not in uniform. Not with backup. Just her coat, her badge tucked discreetly inside her sleeve, and a card in hand. She approached the officer. Prisoner transfer authorization. Immediate release to federal custody. The officer squinted. Didn't hear anything about. Celine stepped in closer. Low voice firm. That's because this is level 7. Which means your clearance stops here. Now open the door. The officer, suddenly aware of the badge's strange design, hesitated, then reluctantly obeyed. Marlon looked up, stunned. You're breaking me out? Not a break, she said, unlocking the cuffs. More like rerouting. They moved quickly. Through the side door, down a maintenance stairwell, past the loading dock where no cameras reached. Only when the van door slammed behind them, and the city faded into a blur, did she speak again. They killed your scholarship for this very reason, she said, voice hollow but seething. Your project threatened a network of data manipulation. Verdant's been expanding for years. Marlon blinked. My biometric design? She nodded. They modified it, weaponized it, and sold it to political operatives to track target demo voters, minorities, low-income workers, single mothers, anyone who might swing elections. His chest tightened. So that watch, it's not just access, it's a map. Celine nodded. A map of who they think shouldn't vote. Marlon leaned back in the van, head spinning, his breath sharp. He wanted to scream. He wanted to sob. Instead, he closed his eyes, clutching the flash drive in his coat. But the moment was cut short. The van screeched. Tires blew out. They swerved. Smoke rose outside. Celine grabbed the door. Stay down. Marlon peeked through the window. 4 black SUVs had boxed them in. But it wasn't NYPD. It wasn't even the Bureau. A man in a white trench stepped out, impossibly familiar. It was Carter, Vexler's vice president. And he was holding a federal badge. Carter smirked through the window and mouthed, "You're ours now." The van's steel shell groaned in protest as it was surrounded. Tires hissed from the blowout, smoke curling up through the seams. Celine ducked low, clutching the emergency radio with one hand while keeping her other close to her hip. Outside, Carter's smirk gleamed through the tinted glass, unnerving in its calm. "You said the Bureau had nothing to do with Verdant," Marlon whispered, his voice taut. "They didn't. Carter's not Bureau anymore," Celine said through clenched teeth. He was pulled into a private contract 18 months ago. Black badge work. That badge isn't federal. It's fabricated. Marlon's breath was ragged. So, he's not law? Celine shook her head. He's something worse. He has money. And reach. Within minutes, Celine triggered the van's counter-surveillance protocols, darkening windows, jamming trackers. The momentary blackout bought them seconds. It was enough. A backup vehicle she'd rigged in advance, parked several blocks down, came online. By the time Carter's team broke the lock, the van was empty. An hour later, hidden beneath the floor of a disused print shop in the Bronx, Marlon stared at the Rolex again, its face now detached, the circuitry visible like open wounds. Celine handed him a set of micro-tools. If you want the truth, it's in that chip. Marlon worked in silence, sweat running down his temple. He connected a makeshift jumper from the Rolex chip to a laptop wired through 2 encrypted firewalls. He had barely exhaled before data began flooding the screen. Not files, schematics. He blinked. It was his. Not Vexler's. Not Monroe's. His blueprint. A modular biometric processor. The design was unmistakable. He had drawn it on napkins in the MIT dorm cafeteria, at 3 a.m., after skipping meals to chase code. Every coil, every buffer node, every software stub was a fingerprint of his old mind. But there was a second layer. Overlaid on his schematic were enhancements, military adaptations. They had turned his design into a profiling tool. One that could analyze real-time biofeedback from a person's wearable tech and sort them by predictive loyalty scores. The implication hit like a punch to the lungs. They weren't just tracking people. They were assigning threat values based on race, zip code, and purchase behavior. "What is this?" Marlon whispered, voice cracking. Celine turned the screen. "It's the back door into Vexler's social scoring experiment, funded off the books through Verdant Holdings. They're building a new caste system, digital, invisible, and scalable." Marlon stared at the schematic, his schematic, and felt a part of himself fracture. "This was supposed to help diabetics," he muttered. "I built it to monitor blood sugar through skin conductivity. It was supposed to save lives." Celine placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "They stole your dream and turned it into a weapon, but you still have a choice." "What choice?" he snapped, standing abruptly. "I'm a fugitive. My name's been rewritten. They used me as the villain in my own story." "You still have your mind," she said. "And now the evidence." The next morning Marlon awoke on the print shop cot, a stale croissant beside him. He booted the laptop again, but a new message popped up. Encrypted external signal detected. He traced it to a secure server. Verdant's. A live chat prompt blinked. "We know you're watching. Click to talk." Against his better judgment, he clicked. A video window opened. Vexler appeared, smiling, calm. "Mr. Gates," he began, fingers steepled, Rolexless for once. "I admire your resourcefulness. Truly." Marlon didn't answer. "I'm told you found our prototype. Impressive reverse engineering. MIT was short-sighted to dismiss you." Marlon spoke slowly. "You stole my design, then weaponized it." Vexler didn't flinch. "We elevated it. But you are the wild card. A brilliant one, yes, but unpredictably principled. That makes you dangerous." Marlon leaned in, venom behind his voice. "You're scared." Vexler chuckled. "Fear? No. Concern? Absolutely. Which is why I'm offering you peace." The screen flickered. A document appeared. Legal. Airtight. $10 million. Full non-disclosure. New identity. Private villa in Belize. Disappear. And we close the book. Marlon's fingers curled. "You're buying me off." "I'm offering liberation," Vexler countered. "Be honest. This city never gave you a fair shot." "But I can." Marlon exhaled slowly. "All you've given me is a reason." Vexler tilted his head. "A reason to burn the whole thing down." Vexler's face tightened for the first time. "I'll give you 48 hours, he said coldly. "After that, we treat you as a non-compliant entity." The screen went black. Marlon stared at it, the Rolex still pulsing softly in his palm. He now had 2 paths. Vanish for millions or fight for the truth. Behind him, Celine's voice rang out from the other room. "Marlon, the file's just updated. Your name's been removed from the original patent. It's like you never existed." The glow of the laptop still lingered in Marlon's vision, even after he slammed it shut. Vexler's offer had been polished like marble. Crisp legal language. Offshore accounts. and the illusion of choice wrapped in 7 zeros. $10 million. Freedom, they called it. But the air around the offer smelled thick with something else. Ownership, coercion, and fear. Celine sat across the room, her eyes locked on Marlon, as he paced. The air inside the print shop had grown claustrophobic, too tight to hold the truth. The kind of truth that left scars, not just silence. "You really offered that?" she asked, her voice low. Marlon nodded, jaw clenched. 10 million to disappear, clean identity, fresh passport, everything fixed as if I'm the problem. Celine exhaled. "It's not a gift, it's a leash." "No," Marlon said, stopping cold. "It's a cage." He stared at the Rolex on the work table, now dismantled, its inner workings exposed like a surgical wound. That watch, a symbol of elitism, time, and legacy, had been turned into a Trojan horse. It held the theft of his youth, the betrayal of academia, and the erasure of his very name. Marlon sat, elbows on knees, watching the fractured gears tick without rhythm. "They want me silent. But silence doesn't heal anything. It just makes room for louder lies." Celine leaned forward. "Then what do you want to do?" Marlon looked up, something electric behind his eyes. "Break their rhythm." That night, Marlon connected his laptop to a live streaming portal hosted through dark nodes, encrypted, untraceable. The room was lit only by a desk lamp, and the faint reflection of his own face in the monitor. No scripts, no filter, just one man, sitting at a table, holding a dismantled symbol of power. "Let me tell you a story," he said, voice steady. The stream started slow. A dozen viewers, then hundreds. "I was once told I didn't belong in an engineering lab, that my work was too sophisticated to be my own. That's how they erase you. Not with bullets, with disbelief." He held up the Rolex, the innards glittering under the light. "This watch belonged to a man who said, 'Fix this, and it's yours.' He laughed when he said it, because he didn't believe I could, and when I did, he tried to buy me." Marlon leaned in, his voice thick with something heavier than rage. "Resolve. They offered me $10 million to disappear, to walk away from the truth. And for a second I thought about it, not because I wanted their money, but because I was tired of fighting ghosts that wear suits." The comments exploded. Viewers were now in the thousands. He picked up a flathead screwdriver and wedged it beneath the Rolex's circuit board. "But then I realized, this isn't just metal. This is memory. This is a record of every time someone like me was told they were just lucky to be here." With a clean twist, he snapped the board out. "Time belongs to everyone, not just those who can afford to buy silence." He stood, aimed the webcam down at the table, and crushed the Rolex beneath a hammer once, twice, 3 times. Pieces scattered like the lies it had carried. Then he leaned back, eyes locked with the lens. "Verdant Holdings wants this truth buried. But every piece of this tech is backed up, and every person watching this is now a witness." He ended the stream with 5 words. "Your time is up, Vexler." It took less than an hour before the comments turned into fire. Hashtags exploded. "John. Time stolen. Verdant leaks. Marlon Gates was here." The video circulated through encrypted group chats, university forums, even veteran message boards who recognized the tech as something they'd once been told didn't exist. And then came the unexpected message. It arrived through his burner laptop, anonymous, blinking with a single line of text. "We saw the stream. We can help." Attached was a cryptographic key, and a simple username, shift signal. Celine read the message twice. "Hacktivists? More like ghosts with purpose," Marlon replied, eyes narrowing. They waited. Another message popped up. "We know what VX003 means. We've been following Verdant since 2017, but we didn't have a name. Now we do. Yours." Marlon's breath caught. "They've been watching the same system I built, without ever knowing where it started." A final message loaded. "If you're ready to fight, upload the full schematic. We'll amplify it. But once it's out, there's no undoing this. They'll come for you harder." Celine looked at Marlon. "This is the fork in the road." He didn't flinch. "I've already seen what the other path looks like." He reached for the flash drive. But just before he could insert it, another alert blinked. A government notice sent to every public device in the 5 boroughs. Emergency cybersecurity bulletin. Individual known as Marlon Gates, suspected in digital sabotage of critical infrastructure. If seen, do not engage. Contact federal authorities. Marlon stared at the screen, and then watched as every device around him suddenly powered off, one by one, until even Celine's secure laptop went black. The blackout was total, sudden, surgical, and strategic. 1 second, the screens buzzed with the fury of the live stream. The next, every circuit in the basement safe house went cold. Monitors died. Lights flickered and vanished. Even Celine's secure analog radio blinked out. Only the hum of Marlon's shallow breathing and the faint creak of settling concrete remained. They hit the grid, Celine muttered, already moving toward the fuse box. EMP level, but targeted. Not a citywide outage, just us. Marlon gripped the remnants of the Rolex still warm from the light of the lamp. Somewhere inside its fractured casing, the data chip pulsed silently, still loaded with evidence, still radioactive. They're not trying to erase the files, he said. They're trying to erase me. Celine yanked a flashlight from her bag, tossed it toward him. Backup power's dead too. That's not Verdant. That's someone inside infrastructure. The pieces started to click for Marlon. The public cyber alert, the deepfake videos, the planted alias, and now this blackout. All designed not just to discredit but to isolate. They wanted him cut off. No signal, no audience, no backup. Then we need to make noise louder than they can shut down, Marlon said. By morning the hackers struck back. Somewhere in a labyrinth of VPN nodes and encryption shells, Shift Signal activated a mirrored server using fragments of the Rolex code Marlon had uploaded. The data once scattered and buried inside proprietary tech was reconstructed into something tangible, an interactive code map of the Rolex's software backbone. But it wasn't just biometric data or encrypted pathways. The Rolex was connected to Project Omega Kite, a voter suppression tool. Celine read aloud as the translated code scrolled across the screen. Geo-targeting modules, behavioral loyalty scoring, emotional manipulation algorithms, trigger words for identity distrust, pull fatigue, civic disengagement. Marlon's mouth went dry. They used the code to program ads, SMS campaigns, local misinformation, designed to push black and brown voters into apathy. Celine's hand trembled as she clicked deeper into the file. Verdant didn't just fund Omega Kite. They launched it. The Rolex was a disguised central key, updating the algorithm with each transaction. Wexler's firm made. Marlon's chest pounded. Every hedge fund move, every campaign dollar, they were recalibrating suppression in real time. He pushed away from the table, nausea curling in his gut. They didn't steal my blueprint to make money. They stole it to steal democracy. Within hours, Shift Signal leaked the map onto whistleblower platforms. The code lit up global forums. Analysts traced it to offshore PACs, funding local races in swing states. Emails embedded in the Rolex's memory logs linked Wexler's firm to known political operatives, flagged for racist targeting strategies. The story trended, but cautiously, news outlets hesitant to give full credit. Some labeled it speculative. Others questioned the hackers' motives. But the documents were airtight. The math didn't lie. Marlon had gone from fugitive to unwitting architect of digital resistance, and now the cost would come. That evening, as Marlon sat reassembling fragments of the Rolex in the dim safety of a Bronx warehouse, Celine entered with eyes darker than usual. "Marlon," she said quietly, holding her phone. "Your mother was hit." The words didn't land. They hovered. "By what?" he asked, not breathing yet. "A sanitation truck. City issued." It swerved onto the sidewalk, right outside her apartment. Witnesses say it didn't even break. Marlon stood, blood draining from his face. "Where is she?" "Bellevue. She's in an emergency." He was already out the door before she finished the sentence. When he reached the hospital, Celine not far behind, the hallway felt impossibly long. The fluorescent lights above seemed to flicker in sync with the panic in his chest. A nurse pointed him to ICU 4C. No police tape. No statement. No driver in custody. Just beeping monitors and his mother's broken body on a bed too sterile to carry this much history. He stood at the glass, unable to go in just yet. His mother, Joyce Gates, was the strongest woman he knew. Raised 2 kids while working night shifts at an MTA dispatch desk. Took on housing boards when they tried to overcharge seniors in the Bronx. She didn't speak tech, but she knew justice like she knew her own heartbeat. Now, tubes ran from her nose to a machine, and her wrist, still wearing the thin watch he gave her for her 60th birthday, was motionless. She was outside sweeping, the nurse explained softly. Truck just kept going. Said the cameras weren't recording. Marlon stared at the concrete floor. Hands clenched. They didn't have to shoot me, he whispered. They just hit her instead. Celine touched his arm. They're escalating. Because now they're scared. He didn't answer. He walked into the room and sat beside the bed. His voice cracked but held. You told me to always finish what I start, he said, voice low. Well, I didn't start this, but I'm gonna end it. Outside the ICU, Celine's phone vibrated. Another encrypted message from Shift Signal. We traced Omega Kite's next target list. It's not just swing states anymore. They've adapted the algorithm. It's now targeting schools. Marlon returned to the hallway just as a second nurse handed Celine a sealed manila envelope, marked with a government seal. Inside was surveillance footage from his old college lab, dated years ago, proving his original patent was stolen. The sun dipped low over Union Square, casting long shadows across the pavement already crowded with hundreds of protesters. The air buzzed, not just with chants or outrage, but with something heavier purpose. A makeshift stage had been assembled. No banners, no podium, just 2 crates and a mic. It wasn't a rally, it wasn't organized, it was organic, born from live streams, message boards, whispered warnings. People had come not to shout, but to stand for Marlon, for his mother, for every name reduced to hashtags and dismissed by headlines. And at the center of it stood Marlon Gates, his coat zipped high against the evening chill, his hands trembling, not from nerves, but from rage barely held in check. Clutched in his right hand was a hospital bracelet. The ink still fresh. Joyce Gates, 5th floor ICU. The nurses had let him keep it after he kissed her forehead goodbye that morning. She was stable, unconscious, breathing, but silent, just like the system preferred her to be. Celine stood at the edge of the crowd, watching quietly, a bodyguard with a badge and a badge of grief. Marlon raised the mic slowly, eyes sweeping the sea of faces. 3 months ago, I was fixing watches on the sidewalk, he began, not because I couldn't get a job, but because the jobs wouldn't take someone who looked like me with a record they gave me. The crowd stirred, silent but leaning closer. A man threw me a Rolex. Laughed when he did. Told me to fix it, and I could keep it. Thought he was tossing bones to a dog. But that watch, that was never about time. It was about control. From behind him, a young protester raised their hand, holding a broken wristwatch. Others followed. Across the square, dozens of hands lifted, all holding watches. Some cracked, some old, some plastic. All symbols now. We're told to stay quiet, to stay grateful, to stay down. But my mother's in the hospital because I wouldn't, because I said the truth out loud. His voice cracked. The bracelet twisted in his fist. She always said the world doesn't hate you, baby. It fears you. Because you don't look like what they think genius should be. And she was right. The crowd erupted, not with shouting but with a chant that spread like flame. Time's up, Vexler. Time's up, Vexler. Over and over. Louder. Dozens of phones streamed it live. It hit Twitter in seconds. Then TikTok. Then international media. But power does not fall quietly. As night took hold, sirens howled from blocks away. The chant paused. Lights bathed the crowd in synthetic blue. NYPD formed a perimeter. Riot gear. Shields. Batons. No warning. Gas canisters arced through the air, landing near the stage. One exploded by a baby stroller. People screamed. Chaos surged. Marlon didn't run. He stood tall, arms raised, the hospital bracelet in one hand, the shattered Rolex casing in the other. Celine grabbed him, pulling him backward. You can't get arrested now. I won't let them spin this, he said. Not again. She shoved a respirator into his hand and guided him down a side alley while the square dissolved into screams and stampedes. Hours later, Marlon sat on a rooftop overlooking the square. From above, the lights blurred like burning halos. He pulled out his phone, which somehow had survived the skirmish, and opened a notification. The protest stream had reached 1.2 million views, more than the mayor's last debate, more than any official Vexler interview. Then another alert popped up. DOJ announces formal investigation into Verdant Holdings. And then, FBI requests interview with Marlon Gates regarding Project Omega Kite. Marlon lowered the phone. A flicker of satisfaction moved through him. But it wasn't victory. It was pressure. The kind of pressure that makes walls bend. Back at the safe house, Celine greeted him with a grim expression.
They're in damage control mode. Vexler just gave an interview denying everything. Called it a smear campaign by criminal activists. Marlon collapsed into a chair. Let him talk. The code speaks louder. She hesitated. There's more. You remember Carter's assistant? Bradley? Marlon blinked. The silent one? Celine nodded. You reached out. Said he wants to flip. Marlon sat up. Why now? Because he's scared. Says he knows who wrote the original algorithm, knows where the backups are stored, and knows what Vexler did the night your mother got hit. Marlon's throat tightened. What do we do? Celine pulled a burner phone from her coat and slid it across the table. He'll only meet if it's you. Alone. Marlon stared at the bracelet in his hand, the ink already fading. Joyce Gates was still fighting, her heart still strong. He owed her more than silence. He owed her justice. He picked up the phone. As he dialed, a news ticker scrolled across the screen behind him. Verdant insider found dead in Hudson River. Authorities call it suicide. Name withheld pending investigation. The warehouse was dim, lit only by the flicker of a dying bulb and the nervous tapping of Marlon's foot. Across from him, hunched on a rusting metal stool in a silver-gray suit, was Bradley Penrose, formerly Vexler's right-hand strategist, now stripped of his job, his smile and every ounce of confidence he once wore like armor. Bradley's tie was loosened, his eyes bloodshot. He hadn't shaved. His fingers jittered around a paper coffee cup he didn't seem interested in drinking. Marlon watched him with attention that bordered on disgust. This was the man who had stood silently as Marlon's name was erased, who helped orchestrate the gaslighting that followed. But tonight, Bradley looked like a man carrying a bomb under his coat, and maybe, just maybe, he had one to offer. I'm not here to apologize, Bradley said, voice low. Apologies don't fix blood on pavement. Marlon didn't speak. He didn't need to. Bradley exhaled. I'm here because I can't sleep. And because what's coming, it's going to swallow more than just your name. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a flash drive, sliding it across the table. That's a backup copy of the internal chat logs from Verdant's private channel. Vexler thought he deleted them, but I made a fail-safe, just in case. Marlon picked it up. In case of what? In case he turned on me too. He swallowed hard. And he did. The screen glowed with documents, logs, and transcripts. And then came the one that stopped Marlon cold. Operation TikTok. Behavioral humiliation test. Initiate via Rolex baiting. Bradley nodded grimly. That wasn't spontaneous. That Rolex? That line about fixing it? All rehearsed. They called it the time trap. Vexler wanted to humiliate a black street vendor. Live stream it subtly, then use the footage as an internal compliance motivation tactic. Marlon's jaw clenched. You're saying it was performance art? For control. Control, Bradley echoed. And fear. Always fear. He clicked open an archived video folder. Each clip was time-stamped. Each clip showed Vexler, in a variety of suits and settings, approaching other black street vendors, always with a glint in his eye, always offering broken tech, always laughing. One clip showed Vexler in Midtown, tossing a damaged Bluetooth headset to an elderly man selling phone chargers. Fix this for me, Pops. If it works, I'll let you hold my briefcase. Another showed him near Columbia University, handing a camera lens to a young black photographer, taunting him to prove he had real talent. None of the men on the receiving end of those gifts ever reacted the way Marlon had, because none of them were engineers. None of them cracked it open. Bradley paused the last clip. He wasn't expecting you to be real, Marlon. You weren't supposed to fix anything. You were supposed to flinch. Marlon's stomach twisted. And when I didn't, Bradley looked up, his face pale. Then the real plan began. Character disruption, license revocation, surveillance. That alias they planted. David Reagan, that was created 5 days before you even touched the watch. Marlon's throat went dry. They built a trap and labeled me the threat before I played. Bradley nodded. Because you were never a risk until you proved your mind was equal. Maybe greater. Then you became a liability. Outside, sirens howled in the distance. The city moved on as though lives weren't being rewritten in warehouses. Celine appeared at the doorway, holding her phone with a sharp expression. Drop what you're doing, she said. You both need to see this. She turned the screen. An anonymous email leak had hit the dark web. The subject line was chilling in its simplicity. VX Memo 118. Contingency authorization. Eliminate priority target. The body was short.
If Marlon Gates refuses compliance within 72 hours, initiate executive asset neutralization. Leak footage. Assign domestic infiltration. It was signed, T. Vexler. Bradley sat back, hands shaking. That's not supposed to exist outside internal clearance. Marlon stared at the email, his voice quiet. You said he wanted to control me. He did. Marlon's eyes darkened. Now he wants to erase me. The screen refreshed. News sites were beginning to post the leak, carefully, cautiously. But it was out there. The world was watching now. But truth had never stopped power from pulling the trigger. Bradley whispered. They'll come for me too. They already did. Celine said flatly. There's a notice about a body found in the Hudson last night. Your ID card was in the jacket pocket. That's how they're covering your disappearance. Bradley looked stunned. I'm already dead? He asked. Celine nodded. To them, yes. Marlon stood, the flash drive in his palm. They wanted to control the narrative, he said. Now we write our own. Bradley whispered. What are you going to do? Marlon looked toward the window, where the sky was beginning to bleed into morning. Make Vexler wish I stayed silent. In that moment, Marlon's phone buzzed with a single message. Coordinates. No sender, no text, just GPS. Attached was a caption, where the backups live. You've got one chance. The message came at 3:27 a.m. A set of GPS coordinates sent from an anonymous number. No text, no context, just raw location data. But the caption told Marlon everything he needed to know. Where the backups live. You've got one chance. Celine mapped the point. It was in Queens, an unmarked data facility, embedded inside a long-abandoned community college satellite campus. Verdun had used it before, according to hacked memos, as a ghost node, a place to stash corporate archives without government oversight. If the Rolex backups existed anywhere physical, this would be it. I'll go alone, Marlon said. Too much heat if we roll in loud. You won't make it 5 blocks, Celine shot back. Vexler's eyes are everywhere now. But he had made up his mind. The night wasn't just creeping, it was closing in. And Marlon knew what it meant when power ran scared. It didn't go into hiding. It hunted. 2 hours later, Marlon walked through the broken front gate of the Queen's site, hoodie up, the cracked Rolex case tucked beneath his jacket like a compass. The silence felt forced, curated, as if the world was holding its breath. He reached the door to the basement lab, punched in the code. Shift signal had embedded in the coordinates. It clicked open. Inside, racks of ancient servers lined the walls, blinking slowly like sleepy sentinels. He moved fast, sliding the flash drive Bradley had given him into the mainframe. The screen blinked. Access granted. And then footsteps. Fast. Aggressive. A voice behind him. Turn around. Hands where I can see them. 3 men. No uniforms. Tactical gear. Corporate black ops. Verdun's private enforcers. Marlon didn't move. He thought this might happen. But just as the first man lunged, a blinding strobe lit the corridor. A voice from the shadows shouted, Now! Marlon dropped flat as smoke bombs hissed from the vents. The 3 men coughed, swatted at the air. But too late. Figures emerged from the shadows, masked, swift, precise. A young woman with dreadlocks pulled Marlon to his feet. We saw your stream. Or shift signal. They moved fast, extracting Marlon through a back stairwell and into an unmarked van. The building vanished behind them as quickly as it had been found. The safe house was nothing like the last. It wasn't even in New York. They'd driven to an old jazz club outside Newark, now converted into a digital war room. Marlon sat beneath faded posters of Coltrane and Miles Davis, as a monitor lit up with file after file pouring from Bradley's drive into a secure, decentralized server. One of the hackers turned to him. We've mirrored the backups into 46 nodes worldwide. If they shut us down, the files still live. Marlon nodded. I want it all out. The patent. The emails. Every memo that shows what they did with Omega Kite. With my You sure? Another hacker asked. Once it's out, there's no putting it back. No NDA. No escape plan. You're not just a threat, you're the symbol. Marlon looked down at the Rolex casing, still in his pocket. Then at the hospital bracelet wrapped around his wrist. My mother almost died for this. My name was erased, and they tried to replace me with a lie. There's no safety in silence. He leaned forward. Drop everything. Public torrent. Unredacted. By sunrise, the files were live. The leak was unstoppable. Documents showed timelines, financial transfers, screenshots of internal chats between Vexler and political consultants, bragging about manipulating voter data. The final dagger came from the patent papers, original drafts in Marlin's handwriting, time-stamped in MIT's own system. One file included Monroe's deleted emails, mocking Marlin's intelligence, arranging payment with Verdant for reclaiming intellectual property, and most damning, a voice note. Vexler's own voice, laughing. He thinks he owns it because he built it. That's not how the game works. We own the rule. Within minutes, the internet had its villain. And its hero. Time stolen trended at one globally. Journalists flooded inboxes. The White House issued a statement of concern. But on Wall Street, Verdant holdings began to unravel in real time. Marilyn sat at a cracked wooden table in the jazz club, watching the financial ticker scream across the screen. Verdant Holdings, CEO Thaddeus Vexler. Under internal review, depth of justice files, subpoena for data fraud and election interference. Investors fled. Partners vanished. The SEC froze assets. What Vexler built over 20 years began to collapse in under 20 minutes. Marilyn didn't cheer. He just sat in the quiet, the hospital bracelet still clinging to his wrist, and whispered, "It's not about revenge. It's about memory." Then, Celine burst through the door. Her face pale, hands shaking. Marlin turned on the news. The screen shifted. Outside Vexler's Manhattan office, a black car had just exploded. Details were still emerging. 3 dead. 1 confirmed as a whistleblower from Verdant. The other 2, unknown. Celine's voice broke. "They're not going quietly." Marlin stood, the weight of survival pressing against his chest, like gravity. He looked toward the old stage in the club, where legends once bled music into the air. Then back at the screen, where the digital war he started had finally caught fire. A final message blinked across the hacker's mainframe. "You exposed the code. Now expose the names. They're still hiding behind the fund." It began with a photo. Not the ones of Marlin in cuffs, or the exploded black car, or even the pixelated footage of him on stage, holding his mother's hospital bracelet. It was a quiet photo. Marlin kneeling beside his mother's hospital bed, holding her hand, his other arm wrapped tightly around a cracked plastic toolbox. The one he used every day at his Fifth Avenue stand. The image hit the front page of the New York Times under the headline, "They called him a vendor. Now he's a vanguard." Cable news spun it differently. Some praised his courage, others questioned his methods. Talk shows brought in analysts to decode the deeper racial themes of his story, while avoiding the very system that made it necessary. Billionaire pundits debated his tone while the public chanted his name outside courthouses and congressional offices. Marlin watched the entire circus from the same fold-out chair he had used for 3 years on that sidewalk, now repurposed inside a temporary shelter donated by a community center in the Bronx. He didn't want a pedestal. He didn't want fanfare. He just wanted to breathe. The public apology from MIT came via press release. Dry, sterile, and far too late. "We regret past oversights and are launching a review into institutional bias. We are open to reconnecting with Mr. Gates to explore reconciliation." Marlin deleted the email, without reading the second paragraph. One afternoon, 2 weeks after the files dropped, and the financial world was still reeling, Celine found him sitting by a window, absent-mindedly twisting the remnants of the Rolex casing between his fingers. "It's strange," she said, taking the seat across from him. "You set fire to a kingdom, and they still try to hand you medals." Marlin didn't smile. "They're not medals. They're muzzles shaped like trophies." She nodded. But it worked. The hearings are scheduled. The fund's under congressional probe. Vexler's frozen out. He didn't lift his gaze. They apologized because they got caught, not because they were wrong. Celine let the silence settle. It wasn't awkward. It was respectful. "You still wear that bracelet," she noted softly. Marlin looked at his wrist. "She came out of the coma 2 days ago. First thing she said was, 'Did you fix the watch?'" A weak smile finally cracked through. "I told her. I fixed the world instead." But Marlin wasn't done. Weeks later, in a converted warehouse in Flatbush, he launched something that meant more than revenge ever could. The Time Mend Institute, a tech incubator built specifically for disadvantaged youth. Those overlooked by test scores, forgotten by public schools, and discarded by scholarships that required zip codes instead of talent. No tuition, no gatekeeping, just workbenches, salvaged laptops, and guidance. The first student to enroll, was 11-year-old Bryce Taylor, a kid from Brownsville with a knack for fixing broken drones. He walked through the doors holding a broken Fitbit and left on day one with a working server. Every wall inside the warehouse bore the same mantra: you don't need permission to be brilliant. Marlon taught soldering techniques on Mondays. Celine came in on Wednesdays to talk cybersecurity. By the third week, 5 major corporations had offered to fund the program. He declined all of them. Instead, he partnered with community banks, local Black-owned businesses, and an independent Black tech foundation in Atlanta. It wasn't about money, it was about control. He had learned what happened when you gave that up. Meanwhile, across Capitol Hill, storm clouds gathered. The Department of Justice filed formal charges. Congress scheduled the first round of hearings on technological profiling, corporate election interference, and institutional academic racism. 3 names topped the list of summoned parties: Thaddeus Wexler, Professor Killian Monroe, Verdant Holdings legal counsel. The public wanted blood, or at least honesty. And yet rumors swirled that Wexler might evade the hearing entirely. Senators reported receiving letters of health exemptions, citing stress-induced vertigo and cardiac risks. Media analysts speculated he had already fled to a private estate in the Cayman Islands. His last public appearance had been a vague video statement blaming radical misinformation groups and accusing Marlon of orchestrating a narrative to silence fiscal patriotism. Marlon watched that clip once, then unplugged his screen. It's not about if he shows, he told Celine. It's about how we make sure his silence sounds like guilt. That night, Celine handed him an envelope. Inside was a series of internal Verdant memos, leaked just hours earlier. They outlined potential financial fraud, linked to executive blind trusts, funding off-book international accounts. One of the names listed: Killian Monroe. Marlon stared at the page, the paper shaking in his hands. They shared more than ideas, he muttered. They shared profits. Celine nodded. The academic arm helped launder the tech. The fund moved it. The schools pretended not to notice. But you cracked it. Marlon looked down at the toolbox beside his chair. The same one from Fifth Avenue. The same one he'd used to dissect the Rolex. The same one that held everything he'd ever learned. Because it was all anyone ever let him carry. He stood. I'm going to the hearing, he said. Celine hesitated. You don't have to testify. The documents speak for you. I'm not going to speak, he said. I'm going to show them what happens when you underestimate the people you try to bury. As Marlon turned to leave, his phone vibrated with a blocked call. When he answered, a voice whispered, "If you testify, your mother won't make it to sunrise." The call ended in static, but its threat clung to Marlon's spine like cold sweat. If you testify, your mother won't make it to sunrise. No name, no location, no demand for money, just a promise of silence by force. Celine froze when she saw his face. Marlon, what was that? He didn't answer immediately. He sat down, opened his laptop, and began typing furiously. What are you doing? She asked, transferring every remaining file to 5 new independent hosts. If I go missing, the data survives. If my mom disappears, the truth doesn't. Celine's eyes softened, but her jaw was tight. This is what fear looks like, Marlon. When you dismantle a system so surgically, it starts turning on itself. And somewhere, it was. Across the Atlantic, inside a luxury suite on the 4th floor of a private psychiatric clinic in Geneva, Thaddeus Wexler stared at his reflection in a polished mirror. Eyes bloodshot, face gaunt. The Rolex was gone. His name was trending on a dozen continents. He'd vanished from New York just hours before the Department of Justice finalized their subpoena. And now, surrounded by silence and diplomatic immunity, he sat alone, eating sleeping pills like candy, until his private physician found him collapsed, half-conscious, on the marble floor. The attempt wasn't fatal, but it was theatrical. By the next morning, news outlets erupted. Exclusive billionaire CEO in breakdown, calls himself a target of deep state orchestration. Wexler claims suicide setup, says Rolex leak was fabricated. The narrative twisted like wire, playing the martyr. Marlon saw the headline flash across Celine's screen and shook his head slowly. He's not afraid of dying, he muttered. He's afraid of losing control. As the congressional hearings commenced, the world watched like it was a championship fight. The chamber overflowed with press, analysts, senators, and stunned citizens. Screens everywhere displayed one word: Verdant. But Marlon? He didn't take the stand. He walked into the courtroom, dressed not in a suit, but in the same black hoodie he wore the day Vexler threw him that Rolex. No security detail, no speechwriters, just him. When his name was called to testify, he stood, but declined. "I won't speak," he said clearly, so the room had no doubt, because the files already told the truth, and the truth doesn't need permission. There was a hush. Cameras caught every angle. Marlon reached into his coat, pulled out the broken Rolex casing, and laid it gently on the desk. "This," he said, "was never about time." The prosecution's case unfolded with brutal precision. They showed timelines of voter suppression tactics, logs of transaction laundering, Marlon's stolen patent, Monroe's racist emails, recordings of Vexler mocking other black vendors. One senator asked, "Mr. Gates, do you see yourself as a victim?" Marlon replied, "I see myself as proof that their system was never built to recognize me as anything but." Applause wasn't allowed, but it rumbled anyway. Then came the defense. Vexler, now gaunt and hollow-eyed, wheeled in by two attendants, wore a loose sweater and a soft neck brace. His lawyers painted him as a misunderstood innovator. "Visionaries are often targeted," one said. "The Rolex? Just a prank gone wrong," another insisted. But when shown the leaked memo ordering Marlon's elimination, they called it fake. A smear by rogue hacktivists. The defense scoffed. AI-generated audio. Deep fakes. The judge, a stone-faced man named Judge Harlan Pierce, a longtime figure in corporate litigation, raised his hand, and in one breath he shifted the room's atmosphere. "Motion granted. The Omega Kite files are hereby dismissed as inadmissible due to chain of custody concerns." Gasps filled the chamber. Celine rose to her feet, furious. "That's the backbone of the entire case." Pierce adjusted his glasses. "Unless verified directly from original servers, which have been compromised, such evidence cannot be relied upon in federal court." Marlon sat motionless. It wasn't disbelief. It was confirmation. Celine leaned in, voice barely above a whisper. "Pierce. He went to Stanford with Vexler. Class of..." Marlon closed his eyes. Even now the walls are still held. As the judge struck the gavel, a young intern rushed in, whispering into the prosecutor's ear. Her eyes went wide. She stood and addressed the court. "We just received an anonymous file drop. It contains Vexler's personal journal." By the next morning, city blocks swelled like arteries, alive with movement, outrage, and voices long denied. Washington, D.C. hadn't seen a march like this in a decade. Protesters covered the National Mall like a second skin. Signs waved against a sky heavy with heat. Truth over titles. We are all Marlon. Time was never neutral. They didn't come for politics. They came for something deeper. Recognition. The leaked dismissal of the Omega Kite files, and the judge's long-buried connection to Vexler, lit a fire in the national conscience. News anchors, once tiptoeing, now spoke plainly. Public trust in the judiciary plummeted. It wasn't just about one man anymore. It was about a machine that had always been rigged. A system designed to reward theft, so long as it wore the right suit. Celine stood on the courthouse steps, her eyes scanning the crowd. Marlon, beside her, was still focused. "They're not just here for you," she said. He nodded. "And no, they're here because they've all had something stolen." That afternoon, the courtroom was packed again, no longer a space for legal theater, but a crucible. At precisely 2:17 p.m., the anonymous file drop from the day before, Vexler's personal digital journal, was entered into the record. It was worse than anyone imagined. Lines upon lines of typed arrogance, meticulous logs of strategy meetings, mocking remarks, and emotional manipulation. He detailed vendor experiments, wrote about how panic is better than protest. And worse, he described how to engineer silence through emotional sabotage. In one entry, he called Marlon a streetwise mistake the system failed to filter. Even Judge Pierce couldn't suppress a reaction. The journal was authenticated through metadata, cross-verified with backup timestamps from Vexler's cloud. There was no room for spin, and in a landmark moment, the jury, emboldened by a special session from the Oversight Committee, overturned Judge Pierce's earlier dismissal. Omega Kite was back in. The trial would resume. Cheers erupted outside. Inside, the tension was sacred. When it came time for closing remarks, the room fell still as Marlon stood. No microphone, no theatrics. He held a single object in his hand, the remnants of the Rolex. He looked directly at the jury. His voice was low, unshaken. "I wasn't fixing a Rolex," he said. I was fixing what time tried to erase. He paused, scanning their faces. My story isn't rare, it's just recorded. Most people like me don't get their name back, don't get a courtroom, don't get cameras. They get erased. Quietly, efficiently. He held up the broken watch. This was never a test of technology. It was a test of dignity. They thought I'd be too grateful to speak, too broke to fight, too scared to matter. He turned slightly to face the judge, then the prosecutors, then the defense. But I remembered something my mother told me. He continued. They can't steal what they can't see unless you show them what you're made of. The silence afterward didn't need applause. It was applause. Even Judge Pierce looked down, the corners of his lips tight with unspoken discomfort. Outside, the mood shifted from rage to resolve. Public demonstrations swelled into coordinated action. Class action suits filed against Verdant affiliates. Students walking out of Monroe-linked universities. Whistleblowers releasing archived racial bias complaints. New York, Atlanta, Chicago, Oakland. All pulsed with something new. Not fear, but clarity. Legacy media tried to pivot, calling Marlon a reluctant leader, a digital-era civil rights symbol. But the community didn't want symbols. They wanted systems to be rebuilt from the root. Back in the courthouse, the bailiff stepped forward. The jury is now in deliberation. The judge recessed the court. And then came the waiting. 30 minutes. 2 hours. 5. Marlon sat outside on a stone bench, his hands folded around the hospital bracelet still tied around his wrist. He didn't check his phone, didn't look at the cameras. Celine joined him, quiet as a shadow. Whatever happens, she said softly, you already won. Marlon didn't look at her. Not if he walks. He won't, she said. Too many eyes. Too many names tied to him. Marlon finally turned. But the system still tried to protect him, even after the truth. Celine's silence was her agreement. At 9:42 p.m., a clerk emerged from the double doors, breathless. The jury's ready. The courtroom refilled with urgency. People stood outside with radios, phones, live streams. Every second felt stretched, elastic with anticipation. Marlon took his seat, slow, calm. The foreperson, a black woman in her late 40s, stood holding the verdict envelope. The judge cleared his throat. Has the jury reached a unanimous decision? The foreperson nodded. We have, Your Honor. She passed the envelope to the clerk. The judge unfolded it. He read silently, expression unreadable. Then, in the matter of United States for Thaddeus Wexler. Before he could finish, a bailiff rushed in from the hall. Emergency call, Your Honor. Thaddeus Wexler is missing from federal custody. The courtroom had erupted in chaos. The word missing echoed like gunfire through the chamber. Gasps, shouts. Judges conferred in hushed tones. The jury was stunned into silence. News outlets flipped coverage into overdrive. Breaking, Wexler vanishes before verdict. But Marlon didn't move. He sat in the same chair, eyes fixed on the empty defense table where Thaddeus Wexler had once sat, so smugly, so sure the rules bent toward him. Celine leaned close, her voice barely above a breath. They had him in a private holding unit. His attorneys requested at last minute citing mental health concerns. No surveillance feed, no guards. Marlon closed his eyes. They gave him the back door. His last trick, Celine said bitterly. A final insult. But it wasn't final. Not yet. 3 days later, Wexler was found. Not in Europe. Not on a yacht. He was discovered inside a suburban Maryland compound, one of Verdant's blacklisted properties, hiding in a concrete bunker with encrypted passports, hard currency, and a private jet on standby. His face looked different. Paler, sunken. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. The story broke nationally. Fallen tycoon captured will stand for sentencing. And just like that, the trial resumed. The verdict, still sealed, was read aloud on a stormy Monday morning. The courtroom buzzed with electric tension. Guilty. On all counts. Election interference. Corporate sabotage. Intellectual property theft. Attempted suppression of a federal witness. The sentence. 48 years without parole. It was rare. Nearly unprecedented. But so was the crime. When offered a final chance to speak, Wexler stood slowly, gaunt, still wearing tailored shoes like armor. He looked across the room, met Marlon's gaze, and spoke 6 words. He wasn't supposed to be smart enough. Not angry. Not defensive. Just honest, like a man finally confessing to a religion he never thought he'd be caught practicing. Marlon didn't blink. He didn't need to. The system had finally admitted, in front of the world, that brilliance in black skin was something it was designed to sabotage. Weeks passed. Marlon didn't celebrate. There were no champagne toasts, no lavish interviews. He declined network appearances, refused book deal. Instead, he returned to the place it started. Fifth Avenue. His old vendor table had been removed months ago, but the sidewalk still remembered. The space felt sacred now, less like a corner and more like a landmark. And soon, it would become one. The city, pressed by public demand and an anonymous fund made up of thousands of small donors, commissioned a statue, not of Marlon's face, but of a table, a pair of watchmaker's hands, and a broken Rolex, cracked open like truth itself. The plaque read, "Time earned, in honor of those whose brilliance was never broken, only buried." Every Friday, Marlon returned. He'd bring a folding chair, a coffee thermos, and a beat-up toolbox. He'd sit beside the statue and wait, not for attention, but for questions. And they came. One by one, kids from Harlem, the Bronx, East Flatbush. They'd come with old radios, toy robots, smart watches too worn to charge. Marlon taught them all. No grades, no prerequisites, just curiosity. One afternoon, as the light turned gold across the avenue, a boy no older than 9 approached, clutching a rusted kitchen timer. He stood in front of Marlon, eyes wide, heart loud in his chest. "Are you the man who fixed the broken watch?" he asked. Marlon smiled. "I tried." The boy held out the timer. "Can you fix this too?" Marlon took it, turned it in his hands, and nodded.
Yeah.
"But how about I show you how to do it?" The boy lit up. "Really, you'd teach me?" Marlon bent forward, laying the tool roll between them. "I'd be honored." He handed the boy a screwdriver and pointed. "Start here." Time's waiting. Behind them, a small camera crew from a local grassroots network filmed quietly. No national coverage, no anchors, just neighbors bearing witness. Celine watched from across the street, arms folded. She didn't interrupt. Marlon wasn't just a symbol anymore. He was something rarer, a foundation. And still, the world changed around him. The Time Mend Institute doubled in size. 2 new centers opened, one in Detroit, one in Oakland. Marlon received an honorary doctorate in engineering from MIT, presented by the first black woman dean the school had ever appointed. He accepted it, not with a speech, but with a single sentence. "This isn't forgiveness, this is reminder." But even as truth bloomed in cracks once paved over, the scars remained. He still walked with quiet rage beneath the calm. He still visited his mother every Tuesday, bringing her letters from students. She had recovered fully, but refused to leave her small apartment. "I like being grounded," she told him. "Reminds me where I came from." And Marlon understood, because roots weren't chains. They were anchors. On a quiet fall morning, under golden trees and soft light, Marlon sat alone beside the statue. He pulled a broken timepiece from his coat. His own this time, the first one he ever fixed. The gear still skipped. The crack still ran down the crystal. A boy approached, one he hadn't seen before. Probably from Jersey, based on the accent. He looked nervous. He stared at the statue, then at Marlon, then at the toolbox. "Hey," he said softly, "can I fix watches like you one day?" Marlon looked at him for a moment, then smiled. He handed the boy the broken watch. "You already can," he said. "Start here." As the boy turned the tiny screw, Marlon's phone buzzed. An email marked urgent. The sender VX or redemption. The subject line, "It's not over." They tried to erase his name, his future, his right to simply exist with dignity. But the truth didn't flinch, and neither did he. If you've ever felt the weight of being doubted for simply being you, type yes. If you believe his story should be heard, subscribe if this broke your heart and your silence.